I see you presenting.
Yeah, but I had to leave because I have a meeting in the IDB at 2
Okay,
o'clock.
but you'll be there first. Okay, but you.
Morning. Thank you very much, members of the media, for joining us this morning at our media conference. We are going to deal with a number of issues this morning, and we are joined by Mr. Vishal Boodai. Vishal is one of the members of the Highway Route Movement, and he's going to share some visual images of the highway that is now being constructed between Golconda, going further south down to Debe and so on, and some of the damage that has already occurred to that highway, and he will address that issue and give some visuals. As you know, the MSJ has always been in support of the Highway Route Movement. Way back in 2012, when I was still a member of the government, still a senator, I hosted a press conference at which members of the HRM participated and spoke to the issues of the Debe to Mondazir highway. And so we have done that regardless of whether we were in or out of government. We were speaking truth to power, and we intend to continue to speak truth to power as the movement for social justice. The first issue that I want to address this morning is that of industrial relations in the country, in particular in the state enterprise sector. You are well aware that earlier this week, on Wednesday of this week, Ernesto Kiza, who is the branch president of the OWQ Trinidad branch, was dismissed by Petrotrin for allegedly being absent from work for some 3.5 or 4 hours without permission. I also want to inform the media, I'm sure you know already, that Ernesto Kiza is one of the key leaders in the movement for social justice. He was in fact our candidate in the 2010 general elections when we contested as part of the partnership, and he contested one of 2 seats that the MSJ had candidates in, the Labre seat, and did very, very well indeed. In fact, he came closest to the PNM that any candidate from a non-PNM candidate has ever gotten, and had tremendous support throughout the constituency of Labre. From then to now, Ernesto has led our southwest region of the party, which includes the constituencies of Labre and Point Fortin. And during the local government election last year, he was our coordinator of the local government campaign in the southwest area, in particular the Point Fortin Borough Corporation and some of the seats in the that would have fallen in the Superior Regional Corporation, particularly the Labre Vestini seat. So Ernesto is one of the key leaders of the MSJ, and we have absolutely no doubt that his dismissal was a straight case of political victimization, both because of his fearless union activism and militant leadership of the Trinidad branch, as well as his leadership role in the MSJ in the Southwest Peninsula. We want to express support and solidarity with our comrade Ernesto at this time and his family, and we are very confident that justice will be won and that Ernesto will be reinstated in his job very shortly due to the very diligent work of the Oilfields Workers Trade Union on this matter. This dismissal, I'm not going to get into the details, was not justified and cannot be justified in any way whatsoever in terms of industrial relations. And what we are seeing is some of the worst industrial relations practiced by the partnership government. At NP, a year ago, just over a year ago, some 68 workers were dismissed over an issue dealing with health and safety, including all but 2 of the union's branch officers. And those 2 were not dismissed only because they were on vacation leave at the time. So the company sought to dismiss almost the entire branch leadership of the union together with 50-odd more workers. And now at Point Fortin, Trinidad, we have the dismissal of the branch president. Just to digress for a moment, I've been in the trade union movement for almost 38 years, and I cannot recall a single instance, going back to the days of Texaco, multinational Texaco that operated in apartheid South Africa and so on. I cannot recall an instance of joint venture Trinidad Tesoro or any of those companies, predecessor state companies like Trintoc or Trintopec and so on, ever dismissing a union branch president. Never in my experience was a union branch president dismissed. The company may have contemplated it, but never actually dismissed a union branch president in the oil industry. And we have had now a branch president at Trinma, and last year a branch president at NP dismissed, clearly on the basis of political directives from the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And all working people should take note of that and the kind of policies that this government is pursuing. That then leads me to the issue of the chief personnel officer and the issue of the president's housing allowance. Statements have been made by a number of government ministers, Attorney General included, that the chief personnel officer is an independent post under the Constitution, and therefore the CPO does not take directives from any cabinet minister. That is laughable, but it is also totally false. And I'm saying laughable because everyone in the labor movement would know, and all of the industrial relations practitioners in this country will know, in the state enterprise sector particularly, that the CPO takes instructions from an interministerial team within the cabinet, which sets guidelines and establishes limits, which the CPO then establishes not only for those employees under the CPO's purview, for example, public servants, daily paid workers, teachers, police, fire, prison officers, and so on. Those employees fall directly under the CPO's purview as the employer. However, state enterprise workers, statutory bodies, and so on, also get directives from the CPO with respect to industrial relations matters, particularly collective bargaining, particularly negotiations. And the CPO gives those directives on the directive of the Interministerial Committee of Cabinet. So the members of Cabinet cannot now come and say that the CPO somehow is an independent position under the Constitution, when in fact the CPO is directed, as happened 3 years ago, when there was the 5% wage cap. The whole country remembers the whole issue of the 5% wage cap, which the CPO sent out to all state enterprises and so on, which came from the cabinet. So it is very, very clear that the CPO, while having certain of her functions being established independently under the Constitution, also does take directions from the cabinet. So that's the first point I want to make. So when government ministers come and try and hide behind petticoats, like the CPO is independent and so on, or that the courts have decided with respect to the HRM, so we can't get involved and so on. They hide behind petticoats when it's convenient to them, but they are pulling the strings and giving directions quite clearly. So they wanted to make that point in general terms, not saying what happened, whether the CPO got instructions from anyone with respect to the president's allowance, but I'm making a general point that ministers of this government go publicly and make statements that are false. I want to come now to the specific issue of the housing allowance. Eminent Senior Counsel Martin Daly, former head of the Public Service, Mr. Reginald Dumas, have made some very clear and compelling statements with respect to the inappropriateness at the minor level, if you wish, and wrongdoing at a more extreme level of a housing allowance of $28,000 a month being paid to the president. We have seen the CPO's response with respect to her justifying her decision, we want to make it clear that, first of all, if the accommodation at Flagstaff was not and is not appropriate for His Excellency, then the government of Trinidad and Tobago and President Carmona, before he was sworn in, ought to have resolved that issue before he became president, because there were several months between his nomination as president and his assumption of office. And therefore, suitable accommodation could have been sourced and obtained prior to his assuming office. And we are very sure that there are properties that are available for lease or for rent in appropriate communities that would provide the kind of housing suitable for the head of state. And we agree and recognize that the head of state of Trinidad and Tobago ought to be properly and decently housed. We have absolutely no problem with the head of state being properly housed, fitting and befitting the office of head of state of the country. And therefore, if the Flagstaff accommodation was not suitable, then the solution to that would be to find suitable accommodation. But the solution to that is not to agree to this accommodation between the government, which is responsible for providing the accommodation, and the president himself, or president, nominated president as he was originally. They should have sorted that out before, and if it was not resolved, then what could have happened, what should have happened is that where he's accommodated should not then attract a $28,000 housing allowance. In other words, having agreed to the accommodation, having accepted the accommodation, you cannot now come after the fact and claim housing allowance because where you are being accommodated is not suitable. Let me repeat that again. The process ought to have been to locate suitable and proper accommodation for His Excellency the President. And that should have, there was enough time to have done that. That having not been done, and he being accommodated in Flagstaff with his own agreement and with the agreement of the government, then that is it. You cannot come afterwards and claim a housing allowance because you now feel it is not suitable. And so we are very clear on this. The President has set a horrible example for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to have your cake and eat it. And in this society, that message resonating all the way through is going to say to the country that the standards of behavior in public office are very low indeed. And if the standards of behavior in public office are very low, what do we expect of other citizens? How do we expect them to conduct themselves as they go about their business? And all of this helps to break down the moorings of the country. And certainly the President loses tremendous credibility because of this issue, as he has lost credibility as well when other groups have written him, including the MSJ, on major issues such as the Constitutional Amendment Bill, and we have not even received an acknowledgement from him. So our view is that that housing allowance ought never to have been paid to His Excellency the President, he having agreed to the accommodation arrangements at Flagstaff. The third issue that we want to just very briefly raise before I turn over to Vishal Boodai of HRM is that last week Sunday, you recall, we made a major statement about the falling oil prices and the fact that it is likely that commodity prices and natural gas prices will also trend in the same direction as oil prices. And I've been seeing information coming out in the media already that various key leaders in the energy and business community have also expressed concern because of falling oil prices and because of falling gas prices. So we hold fast to our position that the country must be brought into the picture by the government with an open, transparent, frank accounting to the nation about the implications of the fall in oil prices to the economy, to government revenues, to the country's foreign exchange position, and that anything less than that is being highly irresponsible in public office. Those are the issues that we want to address specifically. And now I want to ask Vishal to identify some issues as we continue as MSJ, our support and solidarity for good governance and transparency. And of course, the Debe-Mondesir Highway is an example of everything but good governance and transparency.
Vishal Boodai, member of the Highway Route Movement. Right. All right. Good morning. As most of Trinidad and Tobago knows, on Tuesday last week, there was a collapse in the Golconda to Debe segment of the Point Fortin Highway project. The Highway Route Movement issued a press release subsequently outlining our concerns with regards to what transpired on that day. And basically, the very short slideshow would just kind of reiterate our position with respect to the hydrology of the area and what should be followed. So everyone knows this map here. This is the highway project and the entire highway Point Fortin project. Last week Tuesday, as I mentioned before, in the vicinity of the Papuri overpass, the shoulder of the highway, approximately 50 feet, collapsed and caused a bit of concern. That's on the segment leading to Debe from Golconda going to Debe. This is what it looked like on Tuesday when we took our photos. You could see a large area, about 50 feet, basically fell down, earth fell down and started caving in. It affected the shoulder because it undermined a lot of the aggregate. What happened, the government chose to put a plastic sheet over to hide what really transpired, and they held down the plastic sheet with concrete that they placed on the periphery. So basically they were masking the cracks and stuff that had developed under the sheet, and basically they tried to also restrict water flow from flowing into this area itself. Now yesterday, which was day 3, this is what it looked like at day 3. You could see a substantial area. Now it became more defined. So if you go back to the previous slide, here it is on day 1, and here it is on day 3, with a huge area actually caved in. And this here is the actual shoulder of the highway, which is about 2 feet away from the highway itself. So you can see how dangerous situation it is at this point in time. We have no idea as to how much earth has been undermined at this point over here, because as you all know, it's covered with the plastic sheets. So it's really getting worse, and today it will be good to have a look as to how much further it has deteriorated. So this is of serious concern. I know the Minister of Works on Friday morning was saying these things are normal, and they have a collapse like this, and I think he's referring to Claxon Bay. But we really would like to state that these occurrences, as anyone would know, are not very normal. To have your entire shoulder of your highway being affected, compromised to this extent, right? And all this on the backdrop that this is the most expensive highway on the planet to date. and this hasn't been open for more than a year, and we've already seen how the shoddy work has been affecting the highway. Now, just to reiterate, that segment of the highway, we were never in contention with that segment. We had no issues with that. But that is just to draw the point that, for one, the proper evaluations were required, and before any projects or construction work is to be undertaken. Now, this is a map here that the IMA, Institute of Marine Affairs, as part of their submission in the environmental impact assessment, had put together, and the map clearly shows that the DB to Mondesi Highway actually passes through the Urupuch Lagoon, right? This was not a map that we made up. This was actually in the EMA itself. Now, this is just some works where they've entered into DB to Mondesi, and they were doing some work trying to fill, and you could see the volume of water that they were trying to, while trying to remove material. Here is part of the swamp. This area has already been filled up. This is in DB Trace, alongside DB Trace, which they've already filled up. Now, I just want to reiterate a couple points before I close. The EMA Review Committee basically raised several concerns, as we've said many times before, about the construction of this particular highway. For example, several state agencies, for example, in this case, the Water Resource Agency, said there was a lack of comprehensive evaluation of the wetland. And they had very, very serious concerns about building this highway. The Forestry Division said the need for mitigation measures to protect against scoring and erosion along the embankments. Now, this is a classic example here of what transpired in the Golconda to DB leg of the highway, where you had serious erosion on the embankments of the highway. The EMA Review Committee, the Met Office representatives, said that an incomplete mapping of flood-prone and landslip areas, for example, DB is a flood-prone area that was not mapped into one of the diagrams, and they said Bunsey and Banwari Trace should have been mapped as areas with unstable slopes. So you see, these issues were all raised before, and they are not being addressed to date. The EMA said, for example, these were approvals that they were required: stormwater management plans, water management plans, and sedimentation and erosion management plan were required before any constructions were to proceed. These have not been obtained or fulfilled to date. And just to reiterate what the Armstrong Committee said, they said, interestingly, the lack of hydrological study to assist with the decision making was flagged in one way or another by most members of the EIA technical review panel, but was not included in the RAR. The EMA should have made this a showstopper in its decision to grant or deny the CEC by virtue of its own determinations, as well as those of the panel members. It did not, and it did not. So you could see the EMA basically relented on a major area, which was the hydrology, which was not properly evaluated during the EIA stage. And basically they had several other concerns that they raised, but I really don't want to get into that at this point. The Met Office raised serious concerns as well. And so basically constructing, just to summarize, we believe that these studies, the hydrological and the hydraulic studies, should have been undertaken in the first place before any construction work is to proceed in the DB to Mondesi leg, to basically avoid scenarios that transpired in the Golconda to DB leg of the highway. The government keeps they keep finding defenses as to why they cannot conduct these studies, and they haven't really addressed the issues to date. We are simply asking, as we have always asked, that an independent hydrological study as part of our assessment of the request that we've made to be fulfilled before the government and NIDCO is to proceed with construction on this highway. We continue to maintain Dr. Kublalsingh is approaching 60 days into his fast, and our position has always remained the same from the start, in that we would like to know and for the government to clearly state what they have fulfilled with respect to the Armstrong recommendation, the Highway Review Committee recommendation. I know earlier this week, NIDCO had released some documents to the JCC as to what the government has fulfilled with respect to the Armstrong review process. We are currently reviewing the documents, and we believe that the JCC is also reviewing, and we hope that sometime soon that a statement will be made as to the government's fulfillment of the recommendations on the Armstrong recommendations. We are of the firm view that we would like an independent mediator or an independent group, mediation group, to sit in this matter, because the highway route movement and the government meeting does not solve the issues, because we both have strong opinions in support or against the debate in Monday's leg. So that's where we maintain that an independent technical group or person mediate in this matter, and all documentations and all submissions be made to this group, and let them decide basically on the way forward. We continue to maintain that as I've said, a mediator to intervene in this matter. And while the mediation is taking place, we would like all works to stop while this mediation measure is being taken. Dr. Kublalsingh has given his assurance that he will end his fast if the government abides seriously to mediation at this point. To date, we haven't gotten any real commitment from the government other than just meeting with them on one occasion. But having dialogue is totally different from mediation. Dialogues, both sides would just simply, as you know, would just express their point of view and argue their points. We believe mediation will help and will definitely bring an end to this stalemate as we see it. Thank you. Any questions? I'll be free to answer. We had a meeting with him on Wednesday afternoon, and he was very weak. I could say that he didn't leave his bed, as his energy levels were quite low. But he continues to have a high spirit, and he is very committed to seeing that process is followed before any highway construction is undertaken. He remains committed to ensuring that the Armstrong recommendations are fulfilled, and he strongly believes that mediation is the only solution to this matter, and he believes that the government and the higher out movement should come to some agreement as to a mediator in this matter to bring an end to this hunger strike. But he is definitely much weaker than days went by, and he told us on Wednesday afternoon that he doesn't see himself lasting more than a week again. he cannot see himself really going beyond the 1 week. So we really hope that a resolution could be found sooner than later, and we really hope that that he really doesn't any unwanted outcome is not felt at this point or seen at this point.
Okay.
He can't see himself going beyond 1 week. Does that mean he will be ending his strike in 1 week, or does that mean he doesn't expect that he will live beyond this week?
He doesn't see himself basically living beyond 1 week based on his assessment of his health. He's not going to give up, as we all know. Many have tried to plead with him, but Dr. Kublalsingh is very focused in his mission to get in transparency and accountability with respect to the construction of the highway. And as he said before, he's willing to commit his life to ensuring that, as I've said, transparency and accountability is upheld with respect to this project and all projects in Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay. I'm sure that you all have done your own investigation of the highway itself. I did see as well, but Vishal didn't show that, but I'm not sure if there were some reports of problems at the
Yes.
Debe interchange as well.
Ivan, who took the video the second day, and Ivan has it where the Papuri Road overpass, the slopes were deteriorating. But I have to get the actual photos for that. It was kind of difficult yesterday.
Okay. Thank you very much. To that. One of the major problems of this project is that it is a design-build project, and therefore there were no designs done by the client, namely the government, to which specification the contractor would then have to conform. The contractor was only given a general brief as to what is required, and then the contractor's responsibility is to design it as the contractor is building it. And that is a horrendously wrong way of implementing a multi-billion-dollar project such as this, which is extremely complex, which has huge impacts, environmental as well as social impacts and so on, going through difficult physical terrain, as you saw from the photograph there with the backhoe scooping up stuff and a whole set of water just falling out of the backhoe. You saw that and so on. That is not hard ground, that is lagoon. And we are seeing a type of construction work where that first landslip is likely to have many, many more problems with the highway after it is constructed, especially between Pinal and Debe, which is going through that lagoon area, because and the country needs to be asking these questions, because this is $7 billion plus of taxpayers' money that is being spent, the largest single public project ever in the history of this country. And the contract with OES and the government has never ever been publicly disclosed. The government refused to disclose it before the courts. It was not disclosed to the Armstrong Committee, so nobody is aware of what that contract says. And that is wrong. Okay? Well, yes?
We've had massive flooding around a number of areas in Trinidad, in particular Narawan, St. Helena, and Oregon Gardens and so forth. What is your take on the response to these citizens being affected by the floods?
Thank you, Vishal, for asking. In fact, I had that as the first point before I got into it. So let me just say on behalf of MSJ that we express our solidarity with all the residents and communities and business people who have been adversely affected by the flooding this past week. I personally have experienced flooding at my home that happened in in June of or July of 2010. So I know what it is like to have your home under 18 inches of water and mud and dirt and so on. It's not pleasant. It's very distressing. And so I empathize with all those many thousands of people who are being affected. And what is very interesting is that when the flooding happened on the 27th, I think, of May, 26th, 27th of May, 2010, which was the day in which the Prime Minister was sworn in, the 26th of May, she left the swearing-in ceremony and went out and visited communities that were flood-prone. We haven't seen ministers out and about in their constituencies whatsoever. And it's very clear that with all of the talk of ODPM and money being spent and disaster preparedness and so on, this country is still very backward in terms, first of all, of infrastructure that would minimize or mitigate impacts of flooding and so on, and heavy rainfall and other natural disasters. And secondly, we are very backward in terms of our response time to give assistance to all of the communities that have been affected. And our policy positions in our policy document address very fundamentally a wholly different perspective to how one would deal with developing infrastructure in communities to ensure that we minimize the impacts of natural disasters.
So would you then say that the OPM has failed in responding to the flood?
Well, it seems to be very slow. You hear these reports that they're sending foodstuffs or containers out and so on, but what has been happening is that the flood waters continue to rise. So there seemed to have been an approach that after the first day, you send some little relief measures and so on, but the flood waters continue to rise. And my information this morning, for example, is that there was very heavy rainfall again in the east, in the Arima area. If there's heavy rainfall up in the east, it means that areas like St. Helena, the whole Caroni River Basin, will continue to be affected by rising flood waters later today and perhaps into tomorrow as well. So what needed to take place was very significant resources going in immediately into all of the areas, rather than little bit chirp, and so on, even as things were getting worse. And so you did not see one very dramatic, immediate, and significant response where all of the resources of the country were deployed to deal with flood mitigation right away. You didn't see that kind of thing happening whatsoever. And so we are dealing with the problems post facto. So after you get a report from some area, well, they now send out somebody to go and check on it and so on. And somebody other area get a phone call, you go and check on it. But given the weather patterns, which the Met Office clearly said, once the flooding started and we knew more rain was going to happen after that, heavy rains would follow, then you needed to have a large-scale, massive deployment of resources throughout those flood areas, areas that were flooded, to assist residents and communities and business people and farmers. Okay? Okay.
a media journalist.
Right.
I mean, I know you're an officer, I know all the seniors, and they know us. They know me. My name is Ivan Tulsi.
Right.
And whenever something's happening, in public interest, we are there to do. Once we don't violate the law. Now the law and land say that whenever there's public area, whether it's a collapse or whatever,
However, it is somewhat border.
yeah, no, just warn me.
So just go and something should happen to you.
No. Listen, we just go where police don't go. So just remember. I think
No,
your record. That's your record. Where police don't go, we just go.
We bring in the facts, okay?
Wherever, we just go, police just go. I know he has to control traffic, so why that man the police? Okay, I police are not going to lie about any information.